our fantastic host committee and all of you for sharing this morning with us. And what I'd like to do is just briefly share a little bit of the state of play and make sure you understand what's motivating me to do this. And then we'll have enough time for hopefully a few questions and we can visit a little bit as well. The thing that's propelling me to run for president is a sense of urgency about the moment that we're in that goes beyond what we're up against with this presidency. I think we all know what's at stake in terms of making sure we don't have a second term of this president. I think not as much is being said about how we got here in the first place, and the idea that a person like this president should not be able to come within cheating distance of the Oval Office to begin with. And the fact that we are here reflects that there are clearly deeper issues that haven't been resolved in our country. And they've been playing out through my entire lifetime in places like the industrial Midwest where I live. And they brought us to this point where it is now possible for the gross domestic product to go up and life expectancy to go down at the same time, which should be unthinkable. And we're at the precipice of disaster when it comes to our climate. We see gun violence escalating and are this close to producing a third school shooting generation. And have to ask ourselves whether we're going to act before we have no good answers for a younger generation asking if we're actually taking care of it. I'm encountering more and more young people on the campaign trail who ask with the moral urgency of people whose lives are at stake what we're going to do for them. I had a 12-year-old in Orlando who raised her hand and asked about my policy on health insurance. And my first thought was like, well, that's a pretty clever 12-year-old. She explained why she was asking. It was because she has juvenile diabetes and understands at the age of 12 what is at stake for her if her parents lose their coverage or she loses her ability to get covered through them. This is what she's thinking about at the age of 12. Almost every event I go to, somebody not old enough to vote asks me about gun safety. And I'm thinking in particular about one who was from Connecticut, 13 years old, tears rolling down his face as he's asking about gun safety and school safety. And then I did the math and remembered that if you're from Connecticut and you're 13 years old, you're about 6 when Sandy was dead. This person, for every kid who is going through active shooter drills, in some cases before they're even learning how to read. And we've got to ask ourselves, what are we going to do so that we can look those kids in the eye? Not in the far-off, distant Jetsons space car kind of future, but in the future where they are both, 10 years from now, when they're 22 or 23, and be able to tell them that we did right by them. I think we can. And I think we can if we provide answers that are bold enough to meet the challenges in front of us, and that can actually unify the American people. And that, I think, is what's at stake right now in the Democratic nomination process. To have a president and a nominee who can present ideas that are up to the task and unify people around them. And the way to do that, in my view, is to rally people around values that right now are being used to wedge us off against each other, but they're at their best are capable of bringing us together. Patriotism being a good example. The flag right now, especially with a president who literally hugs the flag, but then dishonors the republic for which it stands, could be something that unifies us. It just means a different account of patriotism. It's not about telling people who criticize leadership that they don't belong or telling them to go back to where they came from. It's about acknowledging what it really means to care about this country and to protect it. And protecting this country today means paying attention to cybersecurity and election security threats. It means recognizing that gun violence is a security issue. And it means understanding that global climate disruption is the security challenge of our time. 21st century security threat. It's not going to respond to a 17th century security technology like putting up a wall. We have to have a better way of bringing people together around that challenge. Values like faith that are now being used as a weapon against some Americans could be something that could be a basis for allies. And I insist that we can retain our identity as the party that speaks for people of every religion and of no religion equally, and also let voters of faith know they have a choice, and remind people of the traditions, frankly, religious and non-religious moral traditions, all of which have in common the idea that we're supposed to treat others the way we would want to be treated, and that we are responsible for looking after the marginalized and that is how salvation is supposed to work for all of us. And that means that by no means does Christian faith or any faith require that you condone, let alone support what's going on in this White House right now. We can bring people together around a different condition. And even freedom has become partisan. The idea of freedom has been captured and monopolized by one side of the aisle. But our campaign and my presidency will be designed around enhancing the freedom of the American people. Sometimes that means getting government out of the way. For example, right now, we have an assault on women's reproductive freedom that needs to be reversed, and that freedom needs to be enshrined in law. Sometimes it means using the tools of government to make people more free. That's what the healthcare debate is really about, and it's why I envision Medicare for all who want it, a public alternative that anyone can have access to, that I expect will do better than any of the private alternatives out there, but we're going to put that to the test instead of commanding Americans to abandon their private insurance before they're ready. That way we can actually solve the problem and do it in a way that doesn't further polarize a dangerously divided country. It's why I believe we need to build up our investments in things like education. I believe education is a pathway to freedom. But in order to deliver that, we need a Secretary of Education who actually believes in education. One of the first things I said about it. And a different vision of freedom than one that just tells you that freedom comes by way of cutting every regulation and tax you can find is what's actually going to be required to make us free. And I'm motivated to secure those freedoms for others because one of the most important freedoms in my life, the freedom to choose my own spouse, exists by the margin of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. I think now is the time for anybody who has been on the wrong side of any equation of exclusion or belonging in this country to be ready to step up for each other because we don't know who's going to be next. And it turns out that's just about everybody. It's just that we've been carved off and divided against each other. The border wall is never going to get built, but some very real walls are being erected in our current political climate that pit against each other people who have so much to lose if we allow ourselves to remain divided. And there is an opportunity that, frankly, only the presidency is capable to unify the American people before it's too late. If we get it right, we will establish a sense of belonging in this country that will help with everything from the crisis of deaths from despair, where people are self-medicating to the point of harm and even death because they don't know where they belong, to the very real political fragmentation that's making it hard for us to function as well. If we get that right, then we will be able, 10 years from now, not in the distant future, to look at young kids who are young today showing up at these events, asking these questions, and telling them, I'm sorry we let it get to this point, but in 2020, just before it was too late, we actually acted. We took the steps needed to get ahead of climate change so it did not constrain your possibilities. We actually did what it took to deal with gun violence. We actually took the steps needed to ensure that race had no bearing on your health or your wealth or your life expectancy or your relationship with law enforcement. We actually started to get this done. That's what I think we could do in this moment. And I don't think we can. It can't be 4 years from now. It can't be 10 years from now. It's got to be right now. Just before going to questions, let me close with a note on political strategy, because I was at an event not long ago and somebody said, you seem nice. I would vote for my neighbor's dog if I thought that's who could beat Donald Trump. I take that point. I'm a little concerned that Democrats, God love us, have a tendency to overthink things and outthink ourselves on questions like how to win an election. And it would be a good moment to remember that the best way to find somebody who is electable is to identify somebody you think would make a good president, because that's usually what other people see as well. In other words, every single time our party has won, at least in the last 50 or 60 years, it's been with a candidate from the new generation perceived as not being overly connected to Washington and offering a different kind of message. Every single time we have tried to go with the safest, most established, most, forgive me, but most Washington-connected choice. Every single time we've come up short in the last 50 or 60 years. So if we want to win, let's concentrate on how to deserve it and then organize around that. I think that's the best political strategy, but also leads to the best government strategy to move our country out of it. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm running. But like I said, didn't want this whole thing to be a monologue, so I'd love to take up whatever questions are on your mind. Yes.
Thank you for your report. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal majority of the Trump followers voted for Obama previously. So these are people that I believe they could sort of get back. So how do you educate them to use vote?
Are you going to ask a question?
You know, a lot of
kinda
this is
answered
playing
my
out
one
where I
about
live.
the
So I'm from an
strategy, 'cause that
industrial
was
city
my
in the
question.
Midwest.
Are you?
And there are a lot of folks around us who voted
I forgot what I was
for,
going
not
to
just
ask.
voted for Barack Obama and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump, but voted for Mike Pence for governor and me for mayor within a year. Think about that. And so part of what it tells you is it's not all about ideology. And it's not even all about identity. For some people it is. I mean, look, if you're part of this because you're a committed racist, then I'm not going to, those votes I'm not going to get. And some people are there for that, and we're just not going to do it. But that's not everybody who voted this way. A lot of people were not fooled into thinking he's a good guy, but voted to burn the house down because nothing worked. And this is the thing, again, from a strategy standpoint that concerns me about our party. If our message amounts to saying back to normal, it's not a winning message. It's tempting because what we have now is unsustainable, chaotic, right? But we can no more return America to the early 2000s than this president can return us to the 1950s, and we shouldn't try. So we got to make sure that we're speaking to the sense of nothing working that motivated some people to go for literally anything that looked like it was just going to smash up the status quo. What we have now is that part's happening. The house is on fire, but it's also not making anybody better off. And we've got to move the conversation back into the everyday, where our lives are actually shaped by these political decisions, in order to have it not all be about it. And I think that's how you recover some of these people who drifted into that direction in the last few years.
As you conduct your campaign, is there a figure from American history that you find yourself looking to for inspiration?
A lot, but in different ways. So, this sounds like so easy and cheap, but that's the right answer. I think a lot about Lincoln, especially because Lincoln was not just winning the Civil War. He set up the National Science Foundation, the land grant colonies, and the Transcontinental Railroad. And you just think about having the presence of mind to work on those issues at a time when half of the country is broken off and declared war on the other hand. It tells you that he understood that the security of the country depended on its ability to look forward to. I think there's a lot of power in that. So I think about it a lot. I've been thinking a lot about Maynard Jackson, who's probably not as much of a household name. He was mayor of Atlanta. And one of the reasons why there is such a strong black middle class in Atlanta, because he was insistent on making sure that taxpayer dollars in the city went to businesses that had diverse ownership. And I'm thinking about it in the context of our Douglas Plan for Black American systemic racism, because we talk about criminal justice reform, which is urgently needed. We talk about it like it's in a vacuum. And I don't think we can address that if we're not simultaneously addressing questions of economic empowerment, as well as health, education, housing, and voting. All of these things are connected. One of the reasons why we're so intent on making sure that we're using the purchasing power of the federal government in the right way and lifting up a new class of black entrepreneurs is because those solutions are going to be as important for us to support as the problems we're trying to dismantle. So he's somebody who's been on my mind a lot lately. And then anybody who ever changed the way people think about what's possible in an election, including Barack Obama, right? Because another good fable to bear in mind on this topic of electability is that Indiana went blue once since LBJ. We've only gone Democratic once. We're that conservative in the state. It wasn't for Jimmy Carter. It wasn't for John Kerry. It wasn't even for Bill Clinton. It was for Barack Obama. Now, we were having an argument about electability in September of 2007 and saying who would be so electable they could even carry Indiana. I bet Barack Hussein Obama would not have been the top. But it's yet another example of how when we put forward somebody who moves us, we find it'll move a lot of people who we don't even necessarily agree with or understand. But there's something there that just gets you past some of the other things.
We all think that we make decisions rationally, but science tells us that that's not the case. That we primarily make decisions on emotion. So how are you gearing your campaign to snatch the emotions of people who will vote for you?
What I've learned is that even more than how people feel about you, politics is about how you make people feel about themselves. And what we need to do now, which is not easy, is to make people feel a sense of bigness and, to some extent, a sense of safety. Which is just harder to use the tools of politics to do that than to make people feel small and curious. But it can be done, and I think politics at its best is when that is done. Another story of a young person that I've been thinking about a lot ever since it happened was I was on a rope line in Iowa, big backyard stump speech, did my thing, went and shook hands, and a young woman, probably about 13, came up to me and said, yeah, your campaign has made me feel like I can be myself, and I can go to school and talk about what I care about and be who I am and not be ashamed. And I thought I knew exactly where this conversation was going, because a lot of LGBT kids come up to me and share that. She said, I don't have to be ashamed, or hide who I am, even though I have autism. And I did not see that coming. I don't even talk about autism. I mean, I care about funding research on autism. It's not a topic of the campaign. But it was the best validation I've ever had. Because what it means is somebody like her sees something about the way this campaign feels. Not just the policy, but the way it feels to be connected to this campaign. That lets her know she belongs.
That's beautiful.
And this crisis of belonging, it sounds maybe a little bit intangible, but I think it's one of the biggest problems affecting us today. And one of the biggest uses of the presidency, and even a campaign before the first vote is cast, you can do some good, is to cultivate a sense of belonging that then makes it possible on the most nitty-gritty policies, like whether we're willing to pay for one another's retirement, right? Makes more possible. So those are the kinds of feelings we're trying to arouse and cultivate in the course of the campaign, as well as just trying to, I won't really say trying because it's not something I think about a lot, but it's a piece of feedback I appreciate, is when folks let me know that they sense that I'll have a positive effect on their blood pressure when they're channeling. If you want to have a presidency that's helpful or at least not harmful to your blood pressure, you're ready for that.
Yes. So I'm leading a bunch of volunteers in the Northern Virginia area, and so we're canvassing and getting signatures for you. And you're welcome. We really believe in you, and this area is really ideal for you. This is your country. This is your area, and we get a lot of enthusiastic responses, except for Black people. They don't know you. They're not hostile to you, but they're not signing the signature because they're very leery of you. And it's not, I see that you're going out to the leaders, and I see that you're speaking to the special groups, but the everyday people on the street, they're not hearing you. They don't even know your name. And the only ones I'm getting to sign the signatures are the ones that have a white friend who's like, oh, that's the gay guy, and we really like him. We like him. So sign. So how are you going to reach the everyday people? Because I see that you're really getting positive responses from the leadership of the Black community, but they're not talking to people that I'm trying to reach.
Right. Well, it's exactly as you described. Voters need to know you. And especially when you think about how Black voters have felt both abused by the Republican Party and sometimes taken for granted by the Democratic Party.
Right.
I think this helps explain. I don't want to be flip about this, but I'll put it this way: the only person with a commanding level of support right now in the Black community is certainly the person who is best known, not necessarily the person with the most forward-looking vocabulary on matters of race. And so we literally just have to get out there. And we're doing it a kind of grass tots way, right? You'll see me at the Essence Festival or Rainbow Push or meeting with kind of key leaders in the Black community. But really it's a matter of finding ways to get to folks who are not following the blow by blow. And when they hear my plans in terms of the Douglas plan, or when they hear my story in terms of who I am, then it's amazing what the response is. But we have to recognize that there's also a lot of voters who will really be taking their time on deciding who to commit to and be among the last voters to come in. Because they also want to know that you can win. And the best way to demonstrate you can win is to win something.
Right.
So oddly enough, a big part of the pathway to South Carolina for me is Iowa. And that's not lost on us as we try to organize in both places.
Okay.
There's a lot of, when the cameras are not on, there's a lot of kind of low-key outreach that we're doing, meeting with activists and pastors in the different places that we travel to. Because word gets around in that way too. But it is more than anything a challenge of getting known and being a familiar face and earning that kind of trust.
Okay.
So thanks for your efforts on the doors.
Yeah.
I don't think I got it on the camera. I told them I would ask them. Well,
And the person who is the ultimate opponent is neither rational nor sane. And how do you propose to sort of meet that without descending to his very low level?
Yeah, it's a key question because on one hand we need to demonstrate the toughness to deal with that, and at the same time it's extremely important that we not emulate what we're fighting. Not only because of our integrity, but also because strategically, I think if you're on his show, even when you're winning, you're losing because he's defining the terms. And it's one of the reasons why, first of all, I don't take debate when he says stuff about me. He had another go at me yesterday. He is educating the country on how to say my name.
Yes.
yeah.
Free advertising.
But the most important thing is to deny him the capacity to change society. See, the trap he sets up is he does things that you have to respond to. Like morally, if he does something racist or tells a lie, you got to speak to him. But we also can't let him be the time. I mean, look at how we got indications that our country may be this close to a recession. And the big story that week that we were all arguing over was Greenland. Whether to buy Greenland, right? And that works for him. So what we have to do is the moment every time there are one of these provocations, you got to deal with it, respond to it, put it in its place. But like a certain kind of relative at Thanksgiving, you kind of speak to it, and then you do not let it become the talk of the table. Because the other important thing to remember is the less we're talking about him, the more we're talking about you. And the more we're talking about you, the more we're winning. The American people are with us on economic policy, on immigration, on guns, where we've been in a defensive crouch for years. We're winning. On health, on every key issue. There's a strong American majority for it, which is exactly why he needs us talking about Greenland or whatever tweet came out this morning, right? And it will take unbelievable discipline on the part of the nominee to keep the focus of the conversation where it needs to be, not necessarily in the technical specifications of abstract or obscure policy thing, but on what this means for you, how your life will be different if I'm president versus if you stay with me. If you do that, that's how I can do it.
So your background, obviously, you had a long stint in the intelligence area. Can you talk a little about national security and your approach to it, and can you use maybe Afghanistan as an example of how you might handle things differently?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest lesson of Afghanistan is that if you want to get out of endless wars, the best bet is not to get in one. And so we, I think, need to rethink the role of Congress in the use of force. And I think every authorization for the use of military force ought to have a sunset for 3 years built into it. And if we really need to be there, the president should have to go back to Congress and tell them. I just think if troops are willing to go overseas and put their lives on the line, then Congress ought to have the courage to take a tough vote on it. And I think that's how you avoid a situation where, obviously, we had to do something in Afghanistan, no question. But as of the day before yesterday, you could be old enough to enlist and have not been alive on 9/11, and be sent to East Africa based on an AUMF that was supposed to deal with Al Qaeda. And when we lost troops in Niger, there were members of Congress who admitted they didn't even know we were there. So there's got to be a different role for Congress. There's got to be a different bar on the use of U.S. force. Specifically to Afghanistan, I think that the way forward is to, we do have to get the security assurances that we're not going to be back there dealing with an attack on the homeland. But I think we can maintain those with a pretty skeletal counterintelligence and counterterrorism special operations presence, not an open-ended commitment of ground troops. Because tomorrow's the anniversary of me coming back. That was 5 years ago. and I thought I was one of the last guys turning out the lights. And we arguably have more people now than we did then. And so we've got to separate our core interests from the idea that we're just going to kind of be the guarantor of the future of this country. I think the bigger picture is that we're seeing the consequences of the vacuum of U.S. leadership abroad. So the next president's got to not only establish the level for the use of force, but restore U.S. credibility before it's too late. And it's damn near getting to be too late. I mean, the G7 I thought was the most. I was pretty depressed after the Munich Security Conference. You see, the VP was kind of like the person in the lunchroom that nobody wants to sit with. And we got to the G7, and the leaders of the world sit to talk about the most pressing issue they can think of, climate. And there's literally an empty chair where American leadership is supposed to be. It's like the grown-ups patted the U.S. president on the head, sent him on his way, and then sat to talk about what they were really going to do about the big issue. That is not where we need to be. It's also, frankly, it doesn't work for the world. If we see it from Hong Kong to the behavior of the Saudis lately, you see what happens when U.S. leadership is absent. So when I say that the world needs the U.S., it can't be just any U.S. There's got to be U.S. that's actually embodying the things we talk about. But I do think with a renewed commitment to American values, a recognition of how American values are related to American interests, and opening the door on new forms of diplomacy, like climate diplomacy, which if we were authentically leading on climate, is one of the few ways left that we could be back on the front foot with respect to somebody like China. That we could reestablish our leadership role and credibility before our allies just start looking for other partners because they don't think they can count on the U.S. Okay. Yeah.
So, great to hear your points. I'm very excited. I'm part of the member voting demographic, so I'm hoping that we can come out. I work in agriculture in rural areas. I'm a kind of lifelong Minnesotan.
Great.
And I also work in climate. And one of the areas where I think the Democrats have consistently lost maybe some of those historic voters is even though the farmers are most affected by climate, actually, unfortunately, more than most of us on the coast right now, climate is a really politicized,
Yes.
terrifying word for them. So how are you going to approach it so that you do exactly what you said? You don't drop the ball, you take the lead, but you also somehow pivot this in a way that's more advanced.
Good. I'm so glad you asked that. This is at the heart of my strategy on climate. So look, I've got a plan to get us decarbonized by 2050, and so does everybody else, right? We can argue over whether my 2035 target for the medium-sized vehicles is better than one of the others' 2030. What matters is will it get done? And in order for it to get done, this is just too big of a thing for us to do if we're not unified. Now, that doesn't mean we convince everybody of climate science. It does mean that if a lot of people, including rural people, feel like even acknowledging climate represents a defeat for them, if we're clubbing them over the head, telling them that they're bad, right? Or wagging our finger at them, telling them they're foolishly voting against their own interests, this is not just as a matter of basic human psychology. This is not going to incline them to listen to what we have to say. But what excites me about the climate challenge, as frightening as it is that it also represents an opportunity to summon the energies of the country into a project. We always do better as a country when we have a national project. Moon landing, World War II, you name it. We do better when we have a project. And this is a great example of something that only happens if we've got the private sector, public sector, ag sector, nonprofit sector, everybody aligned. And we can and we should. For example, you look at Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. If we were better funding, not just telling, but funding farmers to practice more sustainable agriculture, it could be a huge part of the solution. I mean, scientifically, it is possible for soil to take out as much carbon from the air as the entire global transportation sector puts in. Now, I say scientifically, not yet technologically, but that's exactly the sort of thing that the federal government should be researching. And if it still doesn't quite pencil out, since we're capable of spending billions of dollars paying farmers to not sell their goods to China, we should be able to spend comparably serious research on incentivizing these kinds of agricultural practices. The way I see it is, you go to Minnesota, you go to Iowa, you see how proud folks are of Norman Borlaug, right, and the Green Revolution that fed 1 billion people, grown out in Midwestern agriculture. I want that to be the same level of pride we take in how we figured out climate-sensitive and even carbon-negative farming and spread that around the world. So that is as much a symbol of climate achievement as an electric vehicle or a solar panel. And it's one example, whether it's that or the military or other areas, where we can summon people who absolutely need to be part of the solution, and while we're at it, transcend this political. Because this really is something that the country has to do unified. But then when we do, we will have all the benefits of having worked on something hard together at a moment where we absolutely need that sort of spirit.
Oh, wow.